stuff. Well, welcome back. I hope you all had a nice cup of coffee. Somebody told me there was no coffee, but I found some. So. Before we kick in, I'd just like to quickly whisk around the room. So if you haven't written your name, the name you'd like us to use when we point a microphone at you on the card in front of you, please do so. And I'm just going to quickly go around the room and ask you to give your name, your role, and your company. So I'm just going to start on the left, and if you just talk to everyone.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Andrew Robinson. I'm with Jetstream in the Netherlands. I see a few faces I recognise from the IBC and the CDN. And thank you for the invite.
Cool. Thanks, Andrew. And Jess?
Jess Imaging, Global Head of Webcast Technology for Thomson Reuters Markets.
Cool.
Well, Neil's General Manager of Sales and Business Development for Intertrust.
Hello, Bob Martin from SSVC. We provide BFBS, the Forces Broadcasting Service.
Not sure which one it is.
I'm Alex Amelli. I'm a Senior Technical Evangelist for the Microsoft Media Platform.
So, well, we know who Maria is. Keynote.
Troy Dreyer, a Senior Associate Editor with StreamingMedia.com. Tim Signal, a Contributing Editor with Streaming Media.
There's a theme on this table. You know, Eric.
I'm Eric, Editor of Streaming Media and Program Director for Streaming Media Europe.
Okay, next line, Yaroslav.
Yaroslav Landevsky, CEO of CDN Video, CDN operator in Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and also other countries of Eastern Europe.
Cool.
From Dmitry Chipinjan of Russian Information Agency.
I'm Jeff Davis, and I'm TV infrastructure for Google J's. Peter Lewinton, Director of Klipcorp and Piracy.
And our next speaker, who I'm going to introduce.
I'm Alexandra, and I'm working with Peter as a marketing consultant.
Okay. Misha?
Charles, I'm working for Direct Marketing and
Sorry, Steve.
Hi, I'm Rob Hackmash, I'm a Product Marketing Manager at Marketing Netherlands in the mobile application.
Hi, I'm James Burt, CTO and founder of Lewinton, a video technology company.
Phil Hager, consultant in online and over-the-top services.
Masko Saladzi, I work for Microsoft. I'm responsible for Piracy, from protection technology across all Europe, including Russia, Africa, and the Arabic countries.
I'm going to go left to right. Isn't there someone sitting behind the pillar, or is it just a coat? You're the first on the left. Go.
What's called Chief Commercial Officer, or some people solutions, and my job is to help them make money.
Olivia, we've met. Steve, do you want to start that table off? We'll go around that table.
Sure. I'm Stephen Jones. I am Solution Delivery Director for Wagster.
Hi, I'm Alex Barton, a tech consultant at Apple.
Hi, I'm Martin Beran, from the CTO of a company called Flash Networks.
Hi, I'm Magna, I'm the CTO of Coach.
Hi, I'm Olivier Nobel from N6. I'm an architect on the video platform.
Hi, hello, my name is Philip Rietveld. I'm from the Austrian Broadcasting Corporation, and I deal with designing our video data infrastructure.
Hi, I'm Burt from Media Interactive, a Slovenian-based company. I'm the technology advisor.
I'm Roman Lucic from Slovenia, from Media Interactive, and I'm responsible for user experience.
My name is Frank de Lenz. I'm from Digital Regulator in Spain.
Short Host, I'm one of the European team for StreamingMedia.com.
You're on the wrong table, Stuart. And in the
Hi, Steve Strong, Technical Director of Ideas.
Steve's my business partner. Okay, well, we touched on the subject of I was going to say privacy there. We've touched on the subject of piracy. I'm becoming dyslexic as the day's going on. And so this is actually quite an exciting stage for this, the evolution of this conference, because I've wanted to bring this topic into the discussions in streaming media and get it broken open, get it discussed much more richly. And now we've got two sessions back to back. First of all, a very interesting presentation from a very old former partner in crime and someone very knowledgeable about the rights sector. I'll leave Peter to introduce himself more fully in a second. And then we've got a panel session which is going to focus on anti-piracy technology. So with no further ado, I'd like to invite to the stage Peter Lewinton from Klipcorp.
So Dom, how do I get the
the death by PowerPoint going. Hold on.
Introduce yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think as Dom kindly introduced me there, I've got a broad experience in rights, particularly in sport, and that has really brought me into the piracy space. And Klipcorp is a company that helps clients deal with piracy problems. The statistic there, I think, shows you the extent to which there's a lot of piracy occurring. And the purpose of this presentation is to try to give you some statistics to help frame the argument. Because I think one of the issues that the industry has faced is it's very difficult to be specific about the impact that it is having on people's business models. The type of companies that we provide services to are, as I said, mainly in sport and are mainly dealing with live streaming. So exclusivity is massively important to them. And the pirates undermine that exclusivity and therefore damage the revenues that they can derive from pay TV and subscription models in particular. The type of technology that we use and some of the data that I can share with you today is based on a service that we provide to rights holders. And to give you an idea, in the period of time since March 2011, that's the volume of infringements we've tracked for our clients across that number of properties, and by properties I mean a sports property like a Wimbledon or an Augusta, across that number of pirate websites. That number of pirate websites is constantly growing, and there's a fair amount of churn in the market, so as some fall away, some also grow. And I would point out that not all pirate websites are the same. We track the audience levels of the different pirate websites, and some command significant audiences, while some are really almost, I would say, marginal. They're supported by a massive body of 900 odd blue chip advertisers. Anyone you can pretty much think of, we've tracked across the pirate infrastructure, which is a surprise given the amount of money that companies invest in their own brands. The most stable number is the identity of the channels that get retransmitted. Unsurprisingly, channels like Sky, ESPN, Al Jazeera come up most frequently for us because they are the ones with the broadest rights portfolio. A sense of scale, I mean, this is really only a sense of scale, is that a typical sporting event will be available on 20 different pirate channels at any one time while it's live, and a premium sports event can get up to around about 100, I would say, at any one time. And typically, we manage to get a long-run average of about 65% effectiveness against those pirate channels. To give you a further sense of scale, these data, I don't know whether these figures seem small or large to you, but Google is now receiving 1.5 million DCMA notices per week. Okay? So that gives you an idea of volume, the amount of pirate content that's out there. As you'll see later in the presentation, if you've all survived the PowerPoint slides, a particular piece of technology that's coming through for us deals with pirate set-top boxes. And by that I mean boxes that are connected to the internet and then connected to the television and fed with pirate streams. This is a particular type of piracy that we see growing significantly. We work on, to pick up Olivia's point earlier, we work on legal countermeasures, and we work on developing opinions, QC opinions, to deal with piracy. Although it must be said, as I'll say a little bit later, that the law is not clear and varies significantly from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So some figures for you. I'm sure you can't read that, but basically what that slide is saying is that piracy in the US runs into billions in terms of the effect it has on the economy. All these figures, I think, need to be taken with a pinch of salt because very little of the data that's presented is fully explained in terms of methodology. But you're seeing figures there that $58 billion lost to the US economy, nearly 400,000 US jobs, 30 billion songs illegally downloaded. Now, again, even if these figures aren't right, and there are many people on the other side of the copyright argument who dispute this, I think what you can see from the figures is that there's a consistency to them and that the impact is significant. That's backed up by the fact that separate studies done in Europe show a similar scale. So again, we're into the billions, we're not into the millions, 10 billion euros, nearly 200,000 jobs. But I think it's also fair to say, to pick up again, funnily enough, on Olivia's point, that it's not all doom and gloom, I don't think. These figures can be taken out of context and you can assume that the content business is dead. I don't think that's the case at all. But at the same time, piracy is taking a big bite out of the existing industry. In the UK, again, it's a little bit sensationalist, but you're seeing billions of losses, you're seeing lots of jobs, and you're seeing large volumes of music being downloaded. Interestingly though, digital sales are on the rise. So piracy, whilst it's a big problem, is not destroying the digital landscape. Admittedly though, I think lots of the content owners here would say that digital revenues are not necessarily replacing the analog revenues that came before them. So whilst digital sales are growing a little bit, they're not quite replacing the old status quo. And the point I think I would like to communicate is that were piracy perhaps be more effectively managed, digital revenues would be even greater. I think that's the sort of simple point to take out of all these figures. So it's not a sort of black and white issue that, well, the piracy figures are obviously wrong because digital sales are rising. I think the piracy figures are possibly overstated. Digital sales are rising, but would be rising more if piracy was more effectively controlled. Now, when you really drill into the detail of this, I think it's also important to be specific about the different types of video piracy that we see. Again, we look at sport, we're mainly looking at live streaming. But the types of piracy that we see are the traditional file sharing of on-demand content. That probably makes up in volume terms the largest section. Live streaming to a PC, that's typically taken out of the back of a set-top box through an encoder card, and then it's either streamed or sent out peer-to-peer. There's a further flavour where people don't originate their own signals, they simply embed their signals in their own website and make some advertising revenue on the back of that embedded signal. The growing trend for what I call a specifically designed pirate box, which receives an over-the-top signal via the internet. And we see examples of companies actually producing their own pirate streams specifically to populate these set-top boxes. And in the example of a client that we worked with, they had their DTH European business decimated by about 90% because of the emergence of these particular sorts of set-top box. And then there's the breaking of the encryption on a set-top box, on a traditional TV set-top box card. I don't know if this came across your vision at all, but last year Virgin Media managed to secure the conviction of some individuals who'd managed to crack their encryption on their cards, and they thought it cost them about 150 million a year. So again, to get back to the earlier point, piracy, significant number. Clearly this is a significant number. It's having an impact. Not destroying the business, but it's having an impact. In a sort of market a little further away, I think the figure that jumps out there is the 92%, and what that refers to is the number of unauthorized illegal boxes that are being used to view material in Zimbabwe. I think what that talks to is that when customers in an emerging economy are given the opportunity to watch content for free without paying a subscription, there seems to be pretty widespread take-up and acceptance of those opportunities. So 92% of homes in Zimbabwe are using pirate boxes. Now, you would think, wouldn't you, that with a whole industry based around copyright and based around exclusivity of content, that something would be done. Something must be done about those kinds of figures, the 92% in particular. But I think I am going to risk boring you with copyright now, is that the issue is that copyright was developed a really, really long time ago in a very, very different context. I mean, the internet has not been around for very long in historical terms, and you have seen the emergence of the sites we all know very well, Google, Facebook and eBay, Napster, Pirate Bay, Newsbin as well, in the last 10 years, if no more than that. Certain brave souls, like the MPAA, have taken on some of the pirates with some success, but not with universal success because the legal framework is not clear at this point. I don't know if you're familiar with the Karen Murphy case, the lady who was streaming Premier League content into a pub using a Greek decoder? Well, for those of you who sort of were fascinated enough to read the judgment, what came out of it was that the Premier League don't in fact own the copyright to the match footage itself. So think about that. So they don't own the copyright to the match footage because of a sort of a weird kink in copyright law. What they own is the copyright to the graphics and the music and the commentary. So with that level of uncertainty about the legal framework, you can understand why enforcement is not straightforward. Now, you don't have to take that from me. The lady who theoretically runs digital policy in Europe, depending on your political persuasion, I suppose, Neelie Kroes, who's President of the European Commission, this is a direct quote from her. And what she's saying is that, you know, the last piece of significant European legislation was brought in, you know, in 98, based on 98 knowledge, and then Mark Zuckerberg was 14. So it's unsurprising that it isn't really fit for purpose at this point. So there's a few issues, obviously, to deal with. Large volumes of piracy, an uncertain legal environment. This does get more positive, don't worry. And then you add to that the role of the advertiser. So why do the pirates do this? You know, why do they devote so much of their time and effort to publishing all this material online? Well, surprisingly, it's because it's advertising funded. And even more surprisingly, our data, and I stress this is our information, so it's a sample size, as I explained at the beginning. Google are about 10% of the advertising market. So knowingly or unknowingly, they are supporting online piracy, but there are many other brands, as I said, around about 900. So why do they do that? Why do they advertise around pirate content? Well, as legitimate publishers here will know, if you're trying to sell advertising around material, you have to work in your cost of doing business, so you perhaps get to a £14 CPM or something like that. Pirates are freed from all of that, and they can sell inventory at around £1, £1.50. So it's a far cheaper way of reaching what is actually a pretty big market. A site that was shut down earlier this year by fact, surfchannel.com, you know, a few guys, a few servers, a bit of bandwidth, was generating about 25,000 a month in ad revenues. Now, in business terms, perhaps not massive. If you're a couple of guys with very little overhead cost, probably a lot of people would see that as quite an attractive monthly income. So where's this all going? You know, I've outlined the fact that there's a lot of pirate content about, the legal and regulatory structure is unclear. Is the situation getting better, or is it getting worse? Well, it depends a little bit on your perspective. The number of connected homes is obviously going up very rapidly, and we'll hear later in the week, I think, from the Samsung representative who'll talk about that. But you can see there are so many devices in the home now that are connected to the internet which can deliver pictures to the television. That the pirate, and I sort of feel like I'm copying Olivia's speech from earlier, that the pirate actually has a more attractive addressable market than most regional TV stations. They've got a bigger audience, potential audience at least, got lower costs and far more access to far more devices. I'm sure you are familiar with this, but in no time at all, from 1989 to now, we've reached over 2 billion internet users. So that's a hell of an addressable market. If you're not having to worry about rights windows, which Maria talked about earlier, if you don't have to be concerned remotely with all of that complexity, you can get your content out there, monetize it with advertising, and get on with it. Now, I'm going to sort of go through these slides a bit more quickly now, but fundamentally what I'm saying here is over-the-top video services, if you look at the majority of the research, are looking like they're the fastest growing section of the sort of market of delivering entertainment into the home. And by that I mean internet connected to a box, connected to your TV, rather than an IPTV walled garden type service. So 38% growth, 68% increase in unit shipments. And out of the pay TV forecasts, I think the expectation is the pay TV market worldwide by 2017 is estimated to be worth about $200 billion US. The over-the-top market will start to take a pretty big slice out of that, because obviously your cost of distribution is higher. Now, obviously you heard earlier that there'll be a lot of regional aspects to that, but I have to say that from the pirate work that we've seen, or the pirate activity that we've seen, those pirates are not acting in a regional way. So they are just delivering content all over the world using these boxes. So whether or not the legitimate providers can maintain a regional approach, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. So this really is a slightly more attractive slide, but the one that I'd really like to spend the time talking to you about, and I'd be interested in any views you have on this. So this is the question. Looking forward, as you all put your business models together, how much of a bite will the over-the-top pirate content take out of paid TV revenues? On your left, you have the pirates, global, no rights costs, no technical costs. On the right, you've got your legitimate operators delivering massively complicated services through, as Maria explained, a really complicated set of rules and criteria, having to pay rights fees, having to pay technical costs. How much is it going to be? 1% of 200 billion in 2017? 10%? 50%? Very difficult to know exactly where it's going to go. I think very few people in the room would say 0. I mean, I don't know if any of you have a view. Anyone want to offer a number? Phil, you got a...
I'll go 10.
You go 10?
Yeah. Because I think it's down to the rights windows. I think the rights windows, unless they do something about it, people are so patient, but just look for the content somewhere. And the kids will Bluetooth to each other or whatever. They've grown up, they don't think they're criminals. So I think I'd like over 10.
10. Well, so if that number about pay TV in 2017 of $200 billion, so that's a $20 billion loss to someone, if those numbers are right. Anyone else? 10?
25 to 30.
That much?
Yeah.
Mm.
When I look at the pirate figures, people are getting that for free. If they're going to have to pay for it, which is basically what that figure is presumably based on, they wouldn't actually bother with the content at all.
Hmm.
How real are those figures? Because if you get something for free, that's one thing, but people are paying for it. So are those figures actually what people would pay?
Well, I mean, I think you have to take them with a pinch of salt. I think the figures are indicative. I mean, I think, okay. Well, I think, to me, it's very difficult to answer this question because I think the percentage has a lot to do with how the market reacts to this current issue. Personal views are that, number one, the legal and regulatory framework needs to be tightened up. If it's tightened up, the percentage will be lower. Because at the moment there is, you know, you may not follow this, but there was a case in the US, myvidster.com, where they basically have been linking to all sorts of pirate content, but that was found to be acceptable. In the UK, Newsbin went the other way. So you've got a lot of sort of space, really, for the pirates to operate. Do people increase the amount of content they publish legitimately? I think that also will reduce the levels of piracy. Do the consumers get the message that actually watching pirate content damages the industry overall? Those factors, I think, can have a positive impact on the bite that it takes out of the pay TV revenues. My personal figure is around about 5%. That's where I end up. I end up in the 5 to 10% area. But is that, you know, this is a thing that the copyright debate tends to be very extreme. Some people say, you know, 30%. At 30%, that's a really big number. I don't necessarily see it in those terms, and I can give you one example, a hard example, which isn't based on anybody else's figures. It's based on stuff that we've done, so I know that it's accurate. So I don't know if there's a channel that's launched this year as a pay TV proposition on the Sky platform called Boxnation. It does what it says on the tin. It provides boxing content to boxing fans. Now you may not know this, but boxing is very heavily pirated, particularly when it comes from Las Vegas in the middle of the night. But they've managed to deal with the piracy issue, and they've managed to get from March, roughly March time to today, about 200,000 paying subscribers on the Sky platform.
Could you say why it's so heavily pirated?
Which, boxing?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not all that regular, so people can't subscribe to a season in general. So they're subscribing to major fights. So, for example, they want the WBO, WBC, WBA world titles, and you can't generally buy them all in one go. So people
Can't get them at all, hardly.
Well, you can on Boxnation.
If you subscribe, yeah, but if you just want to watch one match, you can't watch it.
Well, exactly. So your argument would be, therefore, Boxnation won't be successful.
Then my argument is they should make it available on single subscription to everybody. Single, pay-per-view or something to it.
And who, when you say they, who do you mean?
Whether they are Boxnation.
But Boxnation would have to license the rights from the different boxing organisations to do that. And each boxing organisation, like the movie studios, have a slightly different agenda.
Yeah, but the reason it's pirated is because people can't get it.
Yeah, okay. But so what this example shows, I think, is they've become the most successful non-Sky Sports platform on the Sky platform. So it can be done. It can be done even in the teeth of great piracy. So I'm saying this is sort of an optimistic view. So it can be done. That doesn't, maybe they would have had 300,000 if there wasn't piracy at all. But maybe if they hadn't managed piracy at all, they'd have 20,000. So that's sort of the example I'd like to leave you with. So if there's any questions, I'm sure I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Any questions from the floor? There's some informative figures there. Can I suggest, just in the interest of time, we've got a little bit of time just to make lunch, that
Sure.
I'm going to throw a question at you in a second, Peter, but while I do that, can I ask Phil's panel to come and take their places? Just because I want to switch into that panel session. So, one of the things that I don't hear discussed very often in the content distribution sector, and some of you, I know you know, so I mean, a few of you were at the CDM forum earlier this year, which Maria was as well. I raised this issue, this spectre of Wicked, the World Congress of Information Technology, which is part of a wider summit or symposium within the UN, which is addressing various issues about internet governance. It's heavily lobbied by the ITU, by the ITU forming backbone organising part of that. And there's a move in Wicked this autumn to change the way that the International Telecommunications Regulations framework, which was set out in 1988, works, which has allowed information services to exist in if you like, a free peering. Certainly over here in Europe, you've got a lot of free peering points and so on. So a lot of the data infrastructure that's evolved has evolved without a notion of it costing you more to send data further. So it doesn't cost me any more to send my mum an email here in the UK as it does to send an old friend in Japan an email. There's no this sort of flat rate thing. Wicked is proposing to change that. And that's a macroeconomic change in the way that the telcos manage the availability to IP operators of their underlying layer 2 networks. And it's being heavily supported by content owners because when you move into a world where you can't freely distribute data, it becomes much easier with regulatory way to start controlling the distribution of piracy. So the reason I bring this up, which I think is an important thing that everyone in this room doesn't understand, but the reason I bring this up is I think it is possible, in answer to your question about how much piracy is going on the internet, that there may be no piracy going on the internet by 2017 because the internet won't look like it does today at all. And that's a really crazy sounding thing to suggest in today's day and age. But it's worthwhile checking out what Wicked, what WCIS, what WGIG are trying to push through in a very closed door way. The ITU are not allowing people much input in this discussion, and they're trying to, by control of the underlying networks, effectively turn the internet into an IPTV walled garden, which is an element of content distribution that people are generally putting their head in the sand about half minus things. So I encourage you to go and have a look at that. And in response to your question to us about piracy, I suppose more of a comment, but I think that could dramatically change the content distribution.
Oh, for sure. I mean, but I imagine that there would be a whole host of companies like Google and others who would be pretty firmly lined up to stop that happening.
Unless they've got the rights deals. It's kind of interesting.
Hmm.
And they become very aligned with programs. Anyway,
Okay.
Peter, I'd like to thank you very much for a very informative presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was great. While the PowerPoint's being set up, let me just...
The new one?
Yeah, that's the new one. Just a little preamble away from the world of video. My company is called JUKWA. Apparently in Swahili that means platform. If it doesn't, I've been missold. But I do quite a lot of work in the online and over-the-top space, but also in Africa where the market's emerging. The last time I was in Zambia, I was travelling in a taxi, and I was having a chat with the taxi driver, as you do over there, and he was telling me about his other job that he had on the side. He said, "Oh, I make music. So I thought, oh, you know, I play bass guitar, so we'll have a nice chat about music as we drive. I said, what sort of music do you make? He said, well, I download MP3s from the internet, I burn them to CD, and I sell them.
Do you want Massimo's or do you want the background?
We'll have Massimo's slide first. So just to set the scenes, even this week I found something about DRM, but it was a different kind of DRM. A guy from Microsoft, no disrespect Massimo, ex-Microsoft, former CTO, and alleged patent troll, has just been issued a patent on a system that could prevent people from printing objects using 3D printers, using designs they haven't paid for. Apparently you load a file into your 3D printer, and then your printer checks to see if it's got the rights to make the object, to make it out of what material, how many times, and so on. So this is quite interesting, because my question to the panel is going to be all about, to start off with anyway, does DRM really help the consumer and help the individual? There's a chap called Richard Stallman. Don't know if you've heard of him. It doesn't really matter if you haven't. He is the founder of the Free Software Foundation. Of course he's got a vested interest. His view is that DRM is an example of a malicious feature, a feature designed to hurt the user of the software, and therefore it's something for which there can never be toleration. Now clearly at least one of our panel, who's not into DRM but's into watermarking, would be pleased to hear that. But let's now meet our panel, and we've got two of our panel have got some introductory PowerPoint slides. So first of all, I'd like just a couple of sentences from each one of you to introduce you, and then Massimo, if you could just come up and show your slides, please. Start with James.
Yeah, hi, my name's James Burt. I'm CTO and founder of a company called Viewalto. We're quite new to this space. We've only been going for about 8 months. Probably my face is familiar. I've been CTO of a digital agency before, so I've got quite a good pedigree in this space. We are pretty much anything video we get involved in, but specifically systems integration is really where our sweet spot is. I'm very much DRM. So unlike my friend to my left, I don't sort of sit on one side of the fence, I sit in the middle. So we actually provide Play Ready and Adobe Access hosted services. So we're trying to come at it from very much, if a customer or client wants a DRM service, we're not going to try and pigeonhole them into one or the other. We'll actually try and sometimes offer both, because very much customers' workflows are there already, and it is quite difficult to suddenly take them out and put something new in. So what we're trying to do is say, well, actually, blending some different DRMs together can actually work better for you than just one or the other.
Thank you, James. And briefly, Massimo, because you'll get your chance in a minute.
Yep, I'm Massimo Soazi, so I report and manage Play Ready, so our content protection technology across all Europe. And we are one of the guys that has been developing malicious technologies for the last 20 years, more or less.
Thank you very much.
I'm Oliver Mills. I'm from a company called Intertrust. Basically, if you think of the name Intertrust, the company is really about distributed trust. We were started in about 1985, so we're quite an old company, and we are part of the Marlin developer community and a founder of Marlin. Marlin is an open standard for DRM, which was founded by ourselves along with Sony, Samsung, Philips and Panasonic.
Thanks, Oliver.
My name is Andy Nobbs. I am what's called the Chief Commercial Officer of a company called Civolution, which is a spin-out from Royal Philips Electronics. And we're not a DRM company. We do other things, but we're a watermarking company. So there's a kind of philosophical and, of course, some technical differences between what we do and what people like Oliver do.
Thank you. Super panel. And Massimo, over to you.
Yep. So, just to provide a little background for everyone, I will try to be very quick. One key point is that Microsoft has a quite complex offering around entertainment media and content, so we have a very wide relationship with the studios and with several actors. Not everyone is aware, so we were mentioning before, there should be a company able to provide content across all the globe, maybe in a white label fashion, maybe not, so Microsoft is doing that. Our Zoom service is worldwide, across the globe, etc. Now, we have a very, how can I say, layered offering so that we don't have competing, those layers are not competing. Play Ready, smooth streaming, and we will see, I've seen in the agenda, you will get more on Asia Media Services, etc., are service offering and component offering. You can get those. I don't have any competitor in the world, theoretically, and anyone can license those technology and use it to do what they like. Then there could be higher levels like Media Room, the widest IP television platform deployed in the world, or that could be Zoom, that is a B2C, so consumer service for online entertainment. I wanted to provide you this picture at the beginning to tell you that even in Microsoft, internally to Microsoft, we do face a lot of the challenges we talked of this morning with our own internal customers. So piracy, protecting, deployment on the content, etc., is something we very well know. In the last 3-4 years, I've seen a radical switch on what has to be protected. The perception I have, a lot of people still talks of DRM, digital rights management. We have moved beyond that, and we try to call Play Ready content access and protection technology, because what we really want to do, and what is reasonable to do, is not to protect a physical asset. Who cares? We need to protect the revenues that the industry is doing around that asset. That looks like a detail, but in reality is a radical shift. So the key point is we need to protect all the pipeline, from the OEMs, ODMs, service provider, content owners, retailers, anyone that is doing money out of a digital good is, how can I say, a good candidate for a protection technologies. If there is no revenues, if there is no money, at that point, content protection is simply useless. It's just a pure cost. Let's find other ways of achieving the same results without spending money, complexity, infrastructure into content protection. Now, here I've been quite specific. I'm talking of any kind of revenues. So what we are protecting today is not just premium VOD services. It's not just subscription services, live streaming, etc. We are starting to protect advertisement-based services. One of the key cost point or revenue points is the brand awareness. If a company spends a lot of money to create a successful brand, and that brand is somehow related to content, that is the value that we need to protect. We need to protect how that brand has been built. So with Play Ready, we changed when we started designing it 7 years ago now. We really had a shift into the design paradigm that was behind that. We were not only focused on protecting a digital asset, a movie, a song, a wallpaper, whatever. We really wanted to protect something else. So what we achieved, and I think this is pretty unique proposition in the market, is that we have 3 layers. The first one is technology. I will be very quick. Microsoft provide a full set of technologies that works together. You don't have to do integration testing. It's not just a specification. It's purely working technology. The second one is intellectual property. Every DRM system is proprietary, because if it is public, then it's not exactly secure. Now, we do provide the full IP protection, IP to all our licenses, and we do even provide an indemnification and, indemnification around the IP to all our licenses. The third part is the ecosystem. So compared to other solutions in the market, we do strongly believe Microsoft cannot deploy everything. It's not our objective within the content protection. So as I said before, there are other layers. As a Zune, we are providing everything. We are providing Xbox, Windows 8, and a lot of other stuff to build that service. But within Piracy, our objective is to provide those technology and keep them the most robust and most flexible available in the market. The ecosystem will tailor those technology into the market. So last week I was in Madrid discussing, and there was a Nagra Vision in the panel, and they were saying, we do believe security is not a technology, security is a service. And I'm with them, it's true. The difference is how we do achieve that. In their view, they are the ones deploying the service, the only ones. In our view, we do leverage the ecosystem. In fact, all the conditional access companies, for example, are Piracy licenses because they are expert in deploying security services. And with that, I've finished.
There's going to be a lot of opportunity to talk to Massimo, both in the panel session and afterwards. It's rude to rush people. However, it is a panel session, and we do appreciate that you've flown over. Oliver, would you like to come up as well? I ought to be able to find your presentation. Let's have a quick look. Dor, can you just quickly... You know, we can all work PowerPoints and computers, can't we, in the comfort of our own home, but stand in front of 35 other people and you feel like, how impressive place to break it. So if you can keep yours to 3.
I'll start yawning loudly.
Okay, a little bit about Intertrust. Intertrust, we're a technology company, basically a research largely developed from engineers. We were founded in 1990. We were publicly traded for a while in the early 2000s. We're now an independent private company owned by Sony, Philips, and Stevens. We have offices in Silicon Valley, in London, Paris, Beijing, Seoul, and Tokyo. And we are basically about distributed trust, how to see different devices and different people can be trusted in a predictable way to do what they say they're going to do. We've made a number of investments into companies that are in some way using our technology. Nest Labs, for example, was started by a guy who actually was responsible for the iPod at Apple. He's now doing a thermostat that will work out how each room in your house, how the temperatures are changing, and manage the privacy on that, and also optimize the use of electricity. And so there's a variety of different areas where trust can be important. The founders of Marlin are ourselves, together with Panasonic, Philips, Samsung, and Sony. It's an open standard. Anyone can join. There's no proprietary issues. No one's going to change it on you. It's not going to be called Plays for Sure one day and Play Ready the next day. It's always going to be the same. If you want to change something, you've got to go back to a large amount of people, and it all gets discussed. And so it's slower to deploy than proprietary standards. As you can see, there's a lot of adopters now. Set-top box people like Pace, ADB, Huawei, Humax are all using Marlin. It's a national standard in places like Japan, and it's also very widely supported on multiple platforms, on desktop PCs, on notebooks, pads, mobile phones, connected TVs. Every Sony TV and every Sony device has Marlin built into it. A number of the other Philips, all the Philips TVs and devices have Marlin built into them. Samsung have built it into them themselves. They wrote their own version of it. Sony wrote their own version of it. So there's no proprietary aspect to it. It's an open standard. It's also used in e-books and games consoles. It works across, it's very flexible, so you can basically change the business model at any time. So you can have someone who's able to just look at something once, and you can change their rights literally over the air and in the field, so that they can then have it forever, whatever you want to do. It's not expensive. Typically, we're looking at less than $0.01 per license for VOD. If you're doing hosting it yourself to stream, it's free. If you want to do replay, catch-up TV or free TV. It's very, very inexpensive. You would hardly even notice the cost. Hundreds of millions of devices already deployed globally. National initiatives in UK, Italy, France, Netherlands, Spain, and Japan. And it's also the platform technology in a lot of the other global standards now being adopted, including such as HBBTV, Open IPTV Forum, China DRM. It's an approved DRM for ultraviolet. Oops, we've gone too fast. And as you can see, a number of standards are starting to adopt it. What we find in the business is that generally it takes time. Proprietary solutions will hit the market first. Open standards are generally the way that large telcos, large service providers, broadcasters want to go, because then they're not trapped into one supplier. Well, I hope that helps. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you very much, Oliver, for that whistle-stop tour of Marlin. It seems interesting, doesn't it, to think of DRM as a closed ecosystem, yet Marlin is a kind of an open way of approaching it, but we can come back to that if you're interested. To Andy and to James, having missed the opportunity to show your slides, can I ask you, do we really need content protection? We've heard about loss of revenues, and if Peter's figures are right, 5 to 10% or whatever of money is hemorrhaging away, and as Olivier said, it's affecting tax revenues, and we're all turning into criminals, or our children are anyway. But do you remember what happened with iTunes? First of all, the music had Fair Play DRM put on it, and then in a great volte-face, Steve Jobs said, "Oh, I hate DRM. It doesn't really play nicely with my consumer." Will video follow the same way? Is it just a matter of time, Andy?
I don't want to do my 78 slides, but just very quickly, what we are as a company is we're as I said, watermarking and fingerprinting. So they're not DRM technologies. They're kind of, and there is a philosophical difference, I guess, which is we want to create for us, we want to create as little friction as possible, per Steve Jobs from when it was February 2006. So I think what we want to do is create a kind of content-aware ecosystem. So our view is, if you can deploy technologies that actually enable consumers to more easily consume content, actually you should kind of erode, not remove, but you should erode the concept of piracy. Now, we work with studios every day of the week, but so we recognise that will never happen. But I think we're trying to get to a point, and I suspect we are as an industry, and we're trying to get to a point where we make life easier for the consumer, and the stuff we do is frankly less visible or less of a concern to the consumer.
So the security side, when it's working really well, fades away, doesn't really get in the way of consumers. But James, is that the case now?
I think it's getting better. I mean, I've been in DRM since Windows Media DRM 10 days, which for a lot of people is actually a very, very good solution, worked very well. But obviously the introduction of iPads, smartphones, the market's so fragmented, it's so difficult to have one DRM solution that fits all. I don't think I've talked to any organisation yet that doesn't use, or certainly in the broadcast space, that doesn't use a mix of DRMs just purely because of the workflows that they've had from previous systems. I think the key is just it's got to be seamless for the user. It's got to be, I don't know it's there. I think that's the key, is just, you see a lot of what I would call not so good systems online at the moment that show you it's getting a license. You see buffering, you see this, I'm waiting for a license. Well, I don't really want to know that. I just want to watch my content, please. So I think the key is, from a technical point, and I think it's getting better, certainly from our experience, it has to be seamless. It has to be seamless.
James, could you just outline for those of us that aren't so clear on how does the actual workflow go? You start off with a nice source asset. Then what happens?
So there's actually two ways, and the traditional way is taking a nice clean mezzanine. We heard the words mezzanine earlier, so a nice clean mezzanine format, and then basically the workflow, the old traditional workflow, is to basically encrypt that VOD asset, basically within Play Ready or Adobe Access. And basically then pass that on to CDN. Now, when that encryption takes place, it's obviously using a key. So there's an encryption key in there. Obviously then there's a hosted DRM license service that when the user or the device connects, it's basically going to request a key from that license service. The license service then can supply a huge amount of business logic, whether that's calling out to an e-commerce system, whether it's just a simple subscription model. There's obviously loads and loads of business rules around that. And then obviously the key is pass back to the user plays content. One of the techniques that's being used a lot more now is actually doing that on the fly. So storing all of your assets in one common format, normally H.264. That then enables you with a number of different vendors, providers, Adobe Media Server 5, Wowzer, there's hundreds, being able to apply that encryption at the point of delivery. That makes it quite, I think, very, very good for a lot of content providers, because it means that their storage is less because they're not having to store all their assets in various different flavors and formats. But it also gives you the ability with, certainly the guys from CodeShop are in the room here, and they've taken the approach, well, we're not really hung on Adobe or Microsoft or Marlin, we'll work with all of them. So if they continue to evolve their platform to support all sort of delivery methods and DRMs, then as a sort of content provider, I think that's quite powerful.
Might be powerful, might be great for code work. Sounds like a right nightmare for any of us trying to plot a strategy through it. Work with every single provider. Is that? I mean, Massimo, you cannot put forward that strategy, and you eloquently put forward your PowerPoints. But is there really one ring to rule them all, one DRM to bind us?
Well, yes and no. So I think the answer is no, and anti-competitive legislation, well, not anti-competitive, other competitive legislation was mentioned before. Our strategy as Microsoft in the last 5 years has been to work on interoperability. And we do believe that interoperability will go through the creation of standards that will allow companies to work with different DRMs in a seamless way. As I said in the beginning, no DRM is public. There is no open source, so I continue to believe that. And it's a fact. What we have been working, and Microsoft has been a champion in that, leading and chairing a lot of good organization, has been to support the, for example, ultraviolet in the US. It's true that 5 DRMs are part of that, but only 2 has paid and has done all the work, including paying the money, to be delivered in the first wave, and Microsoft is one of the 2, the other one is OMA. We have been chairing and working to support and standardize the Dash and Chunk standards that are now an ISO official standard, and Microsoft has been one of the 3 signee of the document. We have been, together with Google and Netflix, providing a suggestion to W3C to solve the issue of the video tag and protected video tag. So we are really trying, as I said in the beginning, we shifted our strategy. The strategy is not, I'm here to sell you a DRM. We are here to help you protect your revenues. And we do recognize that pitiful user experience around DRM is a major blocker for services, for revenues, and is increasing essentially the piracy. There are 2 major issues in my little understanding that increase piracy. One is an unbearable business model. So, sorry studios, if you ask $1 zillion for the content, the only outcome will be that 98% of the people will look for the content in a legal way. Second, if you have a crappy user experience. So you have to download it 27 times the same content to watch it on 3 different devices. So as Microsoft, we try to help on the first part, providing the studios a technology that is not only adhering and provide what the studios ask today, but we provide a lot of stuff that the studios will need in the next 10 years. Second, we worked very heavily to enhance the competition, to enhance the standards so that the competition will be moved out of blocking the people in my DRM, but will allow the consumers to have the content flow among different devices. For this reason, for example, Sony licensed PlayReady for the PS3 implementation. And I think it was very interesting, the CEO of Sony, the day after the earthquake, when they announced the availability of PlayReady on the PS3, he said, yes, we are founder of Marlin, etc., etc. We know it, we have it in a lot of devices, but we wanted something that was working today and allowed our consumer to have the content moving across the different devices.
So just to be sure then, your super system also works on iOS, does it? On my iPhone?
We work on iOS, we work on Android. As I said, for example, the power of our ecosystem, some of our licenses like Sony Mobile did an amazing job, I think I should call it like that, to pre-integrate Playready within the DRM abstraction layer in Android 4 and beyond. Okay. We have at least 5 different implementations on iOS done from partners, and when I say 5 different implementations, it does not mean that you have to do integration testing. They simply all work. Is that you have the choice of finding the best business model for you. So the different partners have different implementation and different business models.
Thank you. So Oliver, how do you choose? If there are people in the audience today thinking we need to implement content security, James has mentioned Flash Access as well as Playready. There's Marlin, there's Widevine, and before we even get on to watermarking and Andy's technology, what are some of the things you need to contemplate when you're making a decision about which route to follow?
Well, first of all, you need to consider, are any of the people who are doing any of these things going to compete with me at some point? For example, is it a good idea to go into business with Google if your business is entirely funded by advertising, and where does Google get most of its money from? That's not necessarily a very good idea. It's often good, I think, to look towards open standards because then you're not controlled by any proprietary entity. I mean, Microsoft clearly has had pretty much of a monopoly on the desktop for the last 10 or 15 years, and that may be a good thing in many ways, but it also does force people to go down their route to their proprietary systems. Gradually, things like codecs, adaptive bitrate technologies and so on have moved to open standards, and I believe that DRM will move increasingly to open standards, whereby anyone can look at the specifications. If they're not happy with the supplier they've got, they could go to a different supplier, or they can write their own version of it. And that's the route I see people going.
So strategically, I see a lot of vendors with their systems integrator partners doing lovely sales pitches about how their solution does work cross-platform. I'm still not entirely sure with myself about Marlin how I can reach that decision to say this is the one for me. Is there just 1 or 2 key points you want to convince me?
Well, it has a fully interoperable and distributed key management system. So basically there is one organization called the Marlin Trust Management Organization, which has a number of founders, and we're open to anyone else who wants to join it as a founder or as a shareholder. Mm-hmm. And that basically holds the root key, and then it can create a delegated trust authority to other people so that basically their keys and their ecosystems become interoperable with everybody else's ecosystem. And that enables you to have full interoperability across all kinds of global situations.
Okay, thank you very much. Andy, watermarking, how does it work? How do we implement it? At what stage do we, as James talked about, you take a mezzanine file and you process it. How does it work? Because I could imagine that if you put the watermark in at the encoding stage, the watermark says, yes, I was encoded by Phil, but it doesn't say anything about the path it's followed to get out to a viewer.
So just to kind of give you a background, we're a content identification company, although it's now been rebadged these days to make it kind of more trendy to be ACR. We would like a 3-letter acronym, don't we? So we do what are called watermarking and fingerprinting. So watermarking, there's a difference. Fingerprinting basically kind of takes an image of something and then recognizes it that way. Watermarking actually applies code, if you will, into an asset. So we use different watermark structures for different environments. So, you talked about, knowing the path of a piece of content. So if you know Home Premiere, the PVOD trial in the US with DirecTV, so they used a technique where there was on-the-fly watermarking, as James kind of referenced, on-the-fly watermarking so that, you could determine down to a consumer level exactly which piece of content was being consumed by which consumer. There are other techniques we can apply where it's kind of more of a scattergun or a broadcast or multicast technique. So we can kind of modify our technology depending on the environment. We do that primarily in digital cinemas. We're lucky in that we're the only company in the world that's mandated by the DCIP in the US. We do it for, as I said, PVOD, broadcast monitoring. So it's a technology that we think is kind of relatively flexible and actually can be renosed depending on the distribution environment, if you like.
So last year, one of my daughters was doing her exams called in this country GCSE. And I came across a website that gave audio lessons that she could download to a portable MP3 player. And it said, at the point of purchase, your MP3 file will receive a unique watermark. In effect, don't let your kids pass it to anyone else because there's some forensic policeman somewhere who will be able to detect it back to your daughter as being the pirate. To me, I don't know if that was true or not, but it was absolutely enough. The fear of that, whether the technology was even there, the fear of it was enough for me to give very stern talking to my 15-year-old. Is it theoretically possible that at the point of purchase you can put in a unique watermark with, say, a transaction ID?
Yeah, I think it's beyond theoretically possible.
Very good.
Apple do it on all their music files.
Yeah.
Does
so,
it?
that e-learning, distance learning thing, I think I recognise what you're talking about, shall we say.
Well, that's good to know. During the coffee, I had an interesting chat with Bob from SSVC. Is it okay if we just talk about your case studies? We throw this out to the floor because the panel are here for you, and you're not really here to listen to me. Bob, let's hear your issue.
Yeah, I just want to put it back over PFBS, it's the British Forces Broadcasting Service. It's actually part of a charity, it's a welfare organisation. And basically we have two scenarios. There's the general sort of what you might call the internet type solution, where we're talking about streaming content. I mean, in fact, we're custodians of all people's content. We take content from the BBC, Sky, etc. But we have to get the rights for the films for Warners or whoever. We've also then got closed user groups in places like, say, Afghanistan, where you've got a base there. But with those people, we push files out to sit on a local server where they can connect to it and download that content. So that's a one-way path. So basically, we can't get authentication information coming back. So there's something there, basically, push out content, and it's going to be download and play later. Then we need to be able to time limit that content. So basically, we accept it with less authentication, but then it's got a limited life and limited usefulness afterwards. And we're looking around different DRM solutions for both scenarios. And so that we're up against basically in terms of certification for security side, we develop a player, we buy in a player, what do we have to go through to get that certification, and how much does it cost? Things.
So how much does it cost? We might leave to a discussion afterwards, but do any of the panel, can any of you recommend any solutions? Delivering a video file, for example, to a boat that has no back channel from the internet to request a license, can you still apply security in those environments? Anybody care to answer?
Sure, it can be as little as a cent per piece of content, something like that. You need to have some kind of back channel at some point in order to notify what's been watched and when it's been watched. It doesn't have to be immediate. It can be whenever the boat gets into dock again or whatever else.
Yeah, in some cases, the extreme case, basic content delivered on a caddy, so it takes some like submarine.
Sure.
So it tends to disappear off for months at a time. So yeah.
So I mean, yeah, it does. I mean, if content is if media is encoded for DRM, it can be whatever rules you want to put with it, you can put with it. So if you say it's going to the Navy and it's going to a ship, the Navy pays, £100 or something for the whole bunch of content, then it can do what that £100 says it can do.
Yeah, so basically we provide that free.
Yeah.
But with Marlon, you talk about like you've got this trust hierarchy. Can you operate that just as a closed group, or do you have to go right back to the root for everything?
You can have closed groups, whatever you like to. Yeah, it's very flexible.
And James, can you, like in happens at the beginning of Mission Impossible, where the message self-destructs, can you deliver videos into on a one-way path where you can deliver the license at the same time as the video, and the license is valid until, say, the 31st of December?
Yeah, so in most of the DRM technologies, you can cache a license down to the device, whether that be a iOS device or a PC or a Mac, whatever it might be. And obviously you can burn the business rules into that license. So if most rental is 48 hours playback window, 30 days for that license. So once that expires, that content can't be played back on that device unless a new license is issued. So from the sort of point of view where you're on a ship and you might not get internet connectivity for 60 days, it doesn't matter because that content will be locked into the 30-day window. Obviously, yes, you're going to want to feedback, yes, they've watched it, this is when they watched it, and now I need to delete it. There are those issues to look at, but the actual content from a DRM perspective is locked in for those business rules that you apply.
So could you start that time period from the point they download it? So once you've downloaded the content from the server, you've got to watch it with.
Completely flexible whenever you want to do it.
Yeah. Can you do that with Marlon as well?
Of course, yeah.
So, technology can answer your solution, that's for sure.
So we are deploying already several scenarios like that on airplanes and cruise ships, etc. One of the advantage we provide, I was saying that we added in the technologies a lot of stuff that, how can I say, will foresee use case scenarios for probably the next 10 years. And so some of those are, for example, domains and embedded license will allow you to do that. We are now deploying extended scenarios for streaming with, let's say, proximity. So within a ship, you're in a proximity of your server, so you can take other advantages. One of the key points, and I think this is a slightly different compared to, in my mind, DRM or content protection and watermarking and fingerprinting are complementary technologies. They are not competing. Because within the content protection, we do provide information on the rights. Not only the usage rights, so 28 hours, 48 hours, whatever kind of expiration, but even consumption rights. Can I go on in HD television? Can I go on Wi-Fi distribution? Can I send multi-channel audio over Bluetooth? So those are not exactly strictly rights in terms of content rights, they are usage rights. And so you are able to tailor the user experience based on the agreements you have with the studios. And again, one of the advantages we do provide within the relationship with the studios, and we keep our rules very up to date with the new technologies, so that there is a clear understanding from the studios on what we are able to provide in the ecosystem. And so when you want to do, for example, we are now protecting 5.1 audio for full HD movies, and we're already discussing 4K, as you can imagine. So once that you will have the flag, let's call it like that. Okay, you are allowed to do 4K. You don't have to have any discussion with them, because we will have done the job of cleaning and clarifying what it means within PlayReady and what are the restrictions within PlayReady of having a 4K video or 5.1 audio.
So super, but we are pressed for time with that, and thank you for that. I hope, Bob, you might want to follow up with some of these colleagues, and for all of you who want to follow up with them over lunchtime or this afternoon, please feel free. In the last 5 minutes, does anybody else have any questions from the floor? Otherwise, I have a couple. Yes, Peter.
Out of interest, does anyone on the panel have a view on the source of most of the pirate material that we're trying to deal with? We tend to see it comes out the back of the set-top box as TV delivered. Where does it come from? Is it tracking other forms of encryption? What's the source?
So I have a very funny experience. 2 years ago, I will not say the studio. So 2 years ago, a studio did an experiment applying watermarking essentially at the end of the production. They found after 3 days, 1 week, they found more than 10 copies of the content in the web without any watermarking. So now there are two possibilities. One, there is a really genius hacker that is able to remove all the latest advanced watermarking technologies, or the content itself comes out from the studios themselves. That is, for me, was a very interesting point of view, because the studio admitted and told me that. So this is a very interesting point. Then, from our perspective, the source, as I said before, the problem, one of the key solutions of piracy is to provide high quality content at a reasonable price point without bothering the users, because that is what people really want. Then they will find any way to get the content, set-top boxes, cinemas. You remember the screeners? 4 years ago, the screeners, people recording in They were awful. I mean, have you ever tried to watch one of those? It was a nightmare experience. Nevertheless, there were a lot of people downloading it. So that was a clear indication that you were keen to, how can I say, give up on quality just to have the content 4 months in advance compared to the official distribution window. The studios understood that, and they started to anticipate the windows. Nowadays, we have services protected with PlayReady that do provide over-the-top movies that are in the theatrical window. So we are really overlapping the two windows because studios understood, hey, if I wait 4 months, people will find a way to get it.
Andy, you have a comment back on that? Briefly?
I suspect it's the kind of classic that the strength of the chain is defined by the weakest link. So I certainly recognise the idea about what we would call the kind of pre-release stage. You know, we provide solutions to studios, perhaps for some of the reasons you've just expressed. But you know, so Avatar was something that we worked on quite vigorously. But I mean, you know, there are other events. You know sports really well. So you know, the Olympics is a big thing. The reasons for piracy in the Olympics are different, I think, both on the kind of consumer side and actually on the recipient side, on the broadcaster side. The consumer side is really just a kind of sharing experience. So is it really malign? I don't know. The reason that NBC is really keen to protect it is because if you have an event that is not in sync with US prime time, then you want to make sure you will lose, your ad yield will go down because, you know, people will get, say it's Beijing, which I think was about 9-10 hours adrift. You know, people could have seen Michael Phelps or whoever it was, you know, winning his 58th gold medal. And of course, if you are, you know, one of their advertisers, you want to be part of that experience. So I think there are multiple reasons, excuse me, why, you know, you get leakage. And some of it's technological, and a lot of it, I think, is about business models that, frankly, have struggled really to keep up with the appetite of the consumer. And some of it is just, you know, people like to do stuff like that, I think.
So, it is lunchtime.
Can I just cut across and ask Peter a question? In sniffer dog research and general research that Klipcorp do you think DRM has any effect on piracy?
That's a tricky question. I'm sure it must do. It must do, but the very slim slice that we look at, it tends to be people taking a TV out in the back of a set-top box, which I think by definition means that it's a bit of a problem for the broadcaster because they can't stop people watching it. So that's what I see. So in that particular example, it doesn't really have an impact. I'm sure there's lots of other areas.
I'm aware that watermarking technology is being embedded into STBs, which will, I think, at some point become a challenge to that one. But I think it feeds into the comment that I offered here that DRM really only punishes the people who buy into DRM. It doesn't have any effect on the pirates.
I see it a bit like the windows on a house. I mean, if everyone's starving and you've got a big lump of bread inside the house, people will break the window. If everyone's got a reasonable system of living, they'll just walk past the window. They won't reach in and take stuff out.
Well, on that, I think that's a lovely summary. Could you show your appreciation to the panel and do catch them over lunch or afterwards?